Chapter 13. By the time 12:12 p.m. rolled around on Friday, there were still 2 classes left to go before the final bell. Leaving school signified the beginning of the beautiful and relaxing weekend. Already, boys gathered in the last row, chomping on cups of instant noodles as they discussed which internet cafe they'll spend an all-nighter in later. There is a sense of excitement on everyone's faces, and the joyous atmosphere inside the fully packed classroom can be felt everywhere. However, today is a special day. The classroom is full of noise, but not just because the weekend is right around the corner. Take for example, Chen Mianmian, a literature and arts committee member sitting to the left in front of Jean Siming. Sitting on her desk is a pen holder brimming with 2 beautiful roses, and there are several equally exquisite gifts lying around on her desk. Laughing and chatting with her deskmate, the girl in question suddenly hears someone call out her name, asking her to come outside. Raising her powder-caked face, the girl happily trotted out. Inside this cheerful atmosphere, only Jean Siming seemed out of place. An aura of gloominess surrounded her, an odd picture among the classroom of joyful people. She stiffly crouched over her desk, her head lowered as she casually swiped the phone hidden underneath her desk. Her long black hair is casually pinned behind her ears, revealing her high nose bridge and perfect jawline. However, her long and narrow eyebrows were slightly pinched together and her thin rosy lips were pressed into an even thinner line. That rigid face, that is as dark as the bottom of a black pot, made Sue Rougeau, who has passed by her seat several times now, dare not to step forward and speak up. "Ai." Jean Siming sighed deeply in her heart. Not even a single gift. When she came in earlier today, her heart was in a good mood and full of expectations. And as a result, her entire desk was bare and the inside of said desk was just as empty. Today is White Day, but so far she has not received even a single gift. Even the bean sprout sitting in front of her has received a box of chocolates from a girl. Yao Jin. Yao Jin's name rang out for the nth time from the door of the classroom. Since the beginning of lunch, people have been calling out her name non-stop. Jean Siming unhappily scratched her ears as she couldn't help but glance at the door. The one who called out Yao Jin's name is a male alpha. Both tall and handsome-looking, the boy revealed 2 rows of pearly whites when he saw Yao Jin approaching. He held out a bag tied neatly with a bow to Yao Jin. Sure enough, another admirer has come to send gifts. Jean Siming took a glance at Yao Jin's desk. On top of the desk is a mountain of colorful boxes and other assortments. It's getting to a point where there won't be room left for much more. And Yao Jin has received more than even what she has received before her differentiation. In comparison, Jean Siming has lost quite miserably. Although she had prepared herself for this, she still couldn't accept her tragic reality. So she pulled out her earphones, intending to listen to a song to soothe her irritable mood, when suddenly she heard a sweet voice call out her name. She raised her head to see the only male Omega in the class standing in front of her. His round face was slightly red and his expression also seemed quite nervous. Sue Rougeau stood awkwardly in front of her, and quickly grew more nervous in the face of Jean Siming's impatient expression. He took a deep breath, gathered up his courage, and stretched out the small box in his hands. "See, classmate Jean, this is for you." After sputtering out those words, he did not wait for her reaction before setting down the gift and running away as fast as he could. Jean Siming sat there stupid for a few moments as her gaze landed on the small pink box on her desk. Unexpectedly, the first gift she has received today is actually from the only male Omega in the class. But it doesn't matter who gave it to her, at least they finally reached past the 0 marker. Siming. At this moment, another person called out her name and her heart swelled with expectations. She turned her head to see Senior Louis standing at the door in the back, waving at her with a bunch of flowers in his arms. Her heart soared and she walked to the door in just 2 to 3 big steps. She walked up to Louis, glancing at the cute brown teddy bear at the center of the bouquet. The corners of her mouth reached her ears. "Senior, are you looking for me?" Louis smiled in embarrassment when he noticed her eyes on the flowers. "I asked the boss at the flower shop, but she said they didn't sell any dogtails grass, so I brought the bouquet she recommended instead." That's okay, this one is pretty cute. Jean Siming happily stretched out her arms to receive the bouquet when Louis scratched his head shyly and said, "Can you call Yao Jean over here for me?" Jean Siming froze. Her outstretched hands suddenly pulled back as she covered her mouth in embarrassment and coughed into her hand a few times. The corners of her mouth instantly collapsed. Louis glanced into the classroom and said with a little embarrassment, "I won't hide it from you, these flowers are for Yao Jean. However, I see that there are a lot of people around her and I'm just too embarrassed to call out to her. So, Siming, can you help me out?" Jean Siming's face turned even darker. Is there anything more infuriating than being asked to send flowers to her longtime arch-nemesis by someone she used to like? Of course not. Such a great humiliation, how could she possibly agree? I'm not that close with her. Jean Siming blurted out without hesitation. Oh, I see, okay. With such a straightforward refusal, Louis was a little surprised, but he didn't pay it much attention. Instead, he took a deep breath and loudly called out Yao Jin's name. With the feeling of everyone's eyes on her, Jean Siming uncomfortably explained to Louis that she was returning to her seat and turned around. Unexpectedly, she saw Yao Jin walking towards her the moment she turned around. Today, the girl had her hair up in a bun to reveal her fair and delicate face. She looked as beautiful as a swan with her smooth forehead and beautiful jade-like neck uncovered. Ao Jean glanced at Jean Siming first, a usual smug smirk on her lips, and then looked at Louis as she said sweetly, "Senior, long time no see." However, in Jean Siming's eyes, that voice was not sweet but full of pretentious arrogance. She raised her head and stared at the ceiling as she rolled her eyes. We haven't seen each other for a few days." Louis visibly blushed and he lowered his head as he dared not to look Yao Jin in the eyes. He tightened his grip on the flowers and stuttered as she spoke. Yao Jin noticed the flowers in his hands and smiled. "What a cute little bear, is it for me?" Louis immediately stood up straight and held out the bouquet with both hands. Yes. I don't know if you will like it or not." Seeing Louis transform from a serious upperclassman to a young boy in love, Jean Siming cursed in her heart. Wait a moment. As soon as those words were said out loud, both Yao Jin and Louis turned to look at her. Ahem, Yao Jin, come here real quick. Jean Siming quickly grabbed Yao Jin's arm and then dragged her away. Louis stared at their backs with a confused expression. Didn't she say they weren't close? As it was lunchtime, many students walked back and forth in the hallways, and so many eyes turned towards them when they saw the two of them walking together. Jean Siming pulled Yao Jin directly down the stairs until they stopped in front of a deserted open space. "Classmate Jean, where are you taking me?" Yao Jin was not angry and was still smiling. She seemed more curious about why Jean Siming had suddenly pulled her out of the classroom than angry at being interrupted. Meanwhile, Jean Siming didn't know where she was going either. She had dragged Yao Jin out in a hurry because she just didn't want Yao Jin to accept Senior Lu's flowers. Chapter 14. The soft touch under her palm made Jean Siming realize that she had been holding Yao Jin's wrist this entire time, and so she suddenly let go as if she was shocked by a bolt of electricity. Many students had passed them earlier, so many people must have seen them. Who knows what type of messy rumors will arise from this? Yao Jin, this sly fox, why did she even let her drag her all the way here? Doesn't she know how to shrug off people? Jean Siming glanced at Yao Jin. Every little expression and movements she made were all seen by Yao Jin. The person in question couldn't help but feel amused. What kind of expression is that? Weren't you the one who dragged me out here? And you used so much strength too, my wrist hurts from you squeezing so hard. After saying those words, she rubbed her red wrist and pouted as if she suffered a great wrong. Jean Siming knew that what she did was wrong and her anger wasn't strong in the first place, so her initial momentum softened. However, she still replied stiffly, "Stop pretending to be pitiful in front of me, I didn't use that much strength at all, but it's all red. If you don't believe me, take a look." Yao Jin raises her hand and Jean Siming's gaze moves downwards. The fair skin looked so tender at this moment, as if one could squeeze water out of it, and the area she was gripping earlier was indeed an angry shade of red. For just a moment, a sense of guilt rose in her heart. However, what is with Yao Jin's sickly sweet and coy tone? Is Yao Jin actually using those tactics that she usually uses on other alphas on her? Did Yao Jin's brain short-circuit or something? Jin Siming raises her eyebrows and opens her mouth to say something when she suddenly hears the click. Click, sound of a phone taking pictures. Ever since that incident where she accidentally fell onto Yao Jin in the classroom was photographed and then subsequently posted on the school forums, she's had a sort of PTSD towards the sounds of a camera shuttering. Even now her body subconsciously turns towards the source of the sound, only to see a boy not too far away from them holding up a phone in their direction. When the boy saw that she was looking at him, he immediately lowered his phone and promptly ran away. Jin Siming. She could feel many more messy gazes on them, and so she led Yao Jin to an old banyan tree. There are few people here, and the people hidden underneath the tree have a clear view of the corridor in front of their classrooms on the 3rd floor. From this view, one can see that, at this moment, there is no one lingering in the corridor anymore, and Louis is nowhere to be found. Jin Siming breathed a sigh of relief. She was somewhat nervous that Louis might have been waiting at the door for their return. Jin Siming, what are you trying to do by dragging me here? Yao Jin piped up impatiently. Jin Siming contemplated what to say for a while. Do you, like Senior Liu? Yao Jin burst out laughing. Jin Siming, don't say such nonsense, just because you're jealous of me. I am as righteously and innocently single as can be. Why would I be jealous of you? Jin Siming said dumbfoundedly. The corners of Yao Jin's lips raised up. Of course you're jealous of me, after all I received more gifts than you today. As the saying goes, the more you fear it, the more likely it will come true. And today, what Jin Siming is most afraid of is people mentioning this fact, and Yao Jin just deliberately poked this sore spot. Jin Siming almost spit out blood in anger as Yao Jin's prideful and arrogant eyes stared back at her. Why would I compete with you about this kind of boring stuff? How tacky. Really? Then how come I seem to remember classmate Jin used to like competing with me over these tacky things? You. Jin Siming gritted her teeth in anger at the triumphant look on this vile woman's face, but she had no choice but to take a deep breath and calm down. Don't try to change the subject. If you're not interested in Senior Liu, why did you accept his flowers? Yao Jin's smile disappeared as she blinked her eyes upwards and said innocently, why can't I accept them? If I accept that bouquet, then everyone is happy. Senior Liu will be happy, I'll be happy, but it doesn't have to mean anything on my end. It's 2020, not the 20th century. Classmate Jin can't be such an old-fashioned minded person, right? The fact of the matter is, you can do what you wish with anyone else, but if you are not interested in Senior Liu, it's best for you to contact him less from now on. Jin Siming threw caution to the wind and directly stated her intentions. Anyhow, this is not the first time they've shed all pretense between each other. Ah? Yao Jin's eyes slightly widened and she approached with a curious expression. Why? Could it be you like Dash? No, definitely no. Don't say such nonsense, I don't like him at all. Jin Siming quickly interrupted her. Yao Jin studied her flustered expression and rubbed her chin thoughtfully. I see, I understand now. What do you understand exactly? Jin Siming panicked internally. I understand why you dragged me out here and, Yao Jin slowly stood on her tiptoes and then stretched out a few fingers to tap on Jin Siming's chest. You have a little secret right here. Her little secret? What little secret? Did Yao Jin notice something? Jin Siming quickly crossed her arms over her chest and took a big step backwards to widen the distance between them. I don't have any secrets. As for you, did you even hear a word I said? Humph. Yao Jin responded with a cold snort and gave her a half-smile, before turning around and walking away. Hey! Hey! You still haven't answered my question. Jin Siming shouted at her retreating back. Yao Jin turned back around. Jin Siming, what is our current relationship right now? Huh? Jin Siming was startled by her question. What kind of relationship can there be between us other than one where both parties view the other as unpleasant in their eyes? If that's the case, why do I have to listen to you? Isn't hurting each other the correct way for us to get along? I still have a bunch of gifts to unwrap, so I'll be leaving first. Yao Jin waved at her with a smile on her face and then turned around and left. Jean Siming wanted to furiously slap herself as she watched that smug back leave. She was too impulsive just now. Wasn't what she did like a sort of self-destruction? She shouldn't have confronted Yao Jin so quickly. After all, why would the other party obediently listen to her words? Rather, she has overreached and simply ended up with an egg on her face, and Yao Jin said she knew her secret just now. Could it be that she thinks that she likes Senior Liu? Although she felt uncomfortable with Senior Liu confessing his love to Yao Jin, she understood herself well enough to say that her feelings were currently at the favorable stage and nowhere near the stage of like. However, she wasn't going to just sit idly by and let Senior Liu misplace his feelings onto this fox-like woman. If Yao Jin really wants to confront her on it, then she can't do anything about it. She can only take this one step at a time. Jean Siming pulled her hair in irritation and slowly returned to the classroom after Yao Jin's figure completely disappeared from her sight. Jean. You're back. Hurry up and clean up your table, it almost can't hold any more. Yao Jin's deskmate quickly urged and pointed at the mountain of gifts spread out on her desk. Yao Jin quickly said a word of apologies and then hurriedly sat down to sort out the colorful boxes into tinier hills. As she cleaned up her desk, she recalled the look of exasperation on Jean Siming's face just now, and the corners of her lips couldn't help rising. Who knows what she was thinking as a hint of interest flashed in her beautiful eyes. I never expected you to have such a taste. So, why don't we have some fun? Chapter 15. You say your mouth goes doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo. The sounds of someone singing loudly woke Jean Siming up early in the morning. She squinted her bleary eyes and then stuck a hand out of her thin blanket with difficulty, fumbling around her bedside table, before she finally found her phone. When she unlocked it, she saw it was only 7 in the morning. It's the weekend, what kind of wicked person wouldn't be asleep at this hour and play their music so loudly too? She covered her ears in irritation, but the music was so loud that it assaulted her from all sides, and it was useless to try and block it. After tossing and turning around for a few more minutes, the sound still didn't stop and she couldn't take it anymore. She sat up and rushed out her bed with bare feet before angrily pulling open the door. You say your mouth goes doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo. On the floor outside her door was a bunch of colorful Bluetooth speakers placed strategically so they were facing the gap underneath her door. The noisy singing was coming from these speakers. She knew who was exactly behind this. Even if she wasn't thinking, she would know who it is. Jean Siming took a deep breath, suppressing her urge to punch someone as she shouted loudly, Jean Tong. Get your butt over here. As soon as her roar sounded out, she saw Jean Tong slowly walking towards her from the living room. With a cocky smile on his face, an apron on his body and a glass of water in one hand, he said, Oh, sister, you're awake? Come and eat breakfast. Jean Siming pointed at the pile of mini speakers on the ground, and said furiously, Are you going crazy? When have I ever eaten breakfast on the weekends? Hurry up and get your stupid things away from me. Jean Tong wiped the drops of water on the glass with his apron and put on a "You're making things difficult for me" expression, but this is a task Mother Dearest has given me. That is, I must wake you up for breakfast every weekend from now on. The speakers on the floor kept singing and the noise was just making Jean Siming even more irritated. She was already angry at having to wake up so early, but now hearing Jean Siming say he would do this every weekend, she reached forward with the intention of flicking him in the forehead. Seeing Jean Siming rush at him with gritted teeth, Jean Tong dodged agilely to the side and immediately called for backup. Mom. Hurry over and see this. Sis is angry and she wants to hit me. At this moment, Mother Jean, who was changing her shoes at the entrance and about to leave, turned back around. Enough. How old are you two to be still fighting like this? What Tong Tong said is true, I had asked him to wake you up for breakfast. From now on, you are not allowed to stay until noon. It's for the best that you also go out with Tong Tong after meals and exercise more, instead of staying home all day to play games on your phone. You are about to enter your 3rd year. ABO colleges all have physical fitness tests for alphas. Your father and I have hopes for you to be admitted into the top colleges. So you must do more to prepare before then, do you understand? But Mom, Jean Siming pouted and wanted to argue but was quickly interrupted by Mother Jean. If you don't want to, then say goodbye to the rest of your allowance this semester. Now she was completely left dumbfounded. Once the great Mother Darren * left, she glared fiercely at Jean Tong. T/N, Darren equals Chinese equivalent of the Japanese honorific sama. Hurry up and turn off these stupid things on the floor. Jean Tong took out his phone and tapped on it a few times, and the music that made one's brain ache finally stopped. Sis, don't hate me, this is all Mom's idea. Now it was simply impossible for her to go back to sleep even if she wanted to. Jean Siming held her aching head in her hands and didn't bother with the Jean Tong who was gloating at her misfortune. She turned around and went into the bathroom to wash up. She had fallen asleep at 2 a.m. in the morning and deliberately made sure her alarm clock was turned off, her curtains drawn tightly, and planned to sleep until she naturally woke up. However, she never expected her brother would do something like this to her so early in the morning. After splashing her face with some cold water a few more times, she finally managed to drive away her exhaustion and came downstairs to the dining room and sat down at the table. In front of her is a plate of toast, fried eggs, bacon, ham and a glass of cold milk. Jean Tong sat across from her and happily dug into his meal. Today, the great chef has deigned to cook, so it is your great fortune to even taste this meal. Having gotten used to her brother's weird antics long ago, Jean Siming ignored him and took a bite out of the toast. Surprisingly, the toast was not burnt and the fried eggs were edible and not at all unpleasant to swallow. Not bad, you can barely qualify as a stay-at-home omega in the future. PFFF, cough, cough. The milk almost spurted out of Jean Tong's mouth at her words, and he quickly wiped his mouth with a napkin. What nonsense are you saying? I haven't differentiated yet, and even if I do, I will be an alpha for sure, okay? Seeing his flushed face, Jean Siming's heart was soothed. That's right, she riled him up on purpose. That'll show him for ruining her sleep with such disgusting tricks. Speaking of, she and her brother are on two extremes on the opposite side of the spectrum. One of them dreams about being an omega, and the other desperately wants to differentiate into an alpha, but... Didn't your hospital tests say you will differentiate into an omega? Jean Tong's face turned ugly, and she raised her eyebrows happily at him as she took a sip of milk. Those tests are not completely accurate. After all, didn't you also have omega written in your tests, but differentiated into an alpha in the end? The hand holding her glass of milk froze, and the smile on Jean Siming's lips disappeared. Jean Tong hammered home his victory. By the way, Mom asked you to go out with me after dinner. I asked a few friends to play basketball with me today. You can come along. At the words play basketball, Jean Siming frowned, her brows wrinkled together and her entire face screamed her refusal. No, I won't go to those stinky, sweaty, intense, and full of contact sport events. But if you don't go, your allowance will be. Jean Siming glared at him and Jean Tong shrank back in fright, but continued his threat, allowance. Kaboom! Suddenly a thunderbolt flashed into the sky and interrupted their conversation. Jean Siming got up and looked outside the window. With a hula, she opened the curtains and looked up at the sky that was covered in dark clouds. This was clearly a sign that it was going to rain. She grinned. TSK, it seems the heavens are not cooperating today. It looks like we're staying at home today. Jean Tong narrowed his eyes slyly. It's okay, sis. We made a reservation at an indoor gym, so it doesn't matter how hard it rains, we can still play. Jean Siming. The dark clouds came suddenly and the bright blue sky was instantly overwhelmed by the dark clouds. It was only 7 or 8 in the morning, but the sky outside was as dark as the evening night. Yao Jin sat in front of the long dining table, looking at the eerie scene through the floor-to-ceiling windows, her light-colored eyes still and quiet, just like the sky outside. On the table in front of her, there were several delicious-looking dishes, both big and small, all of which were delivered by a housekeeper a few minutes ago. After the food was delivered, the housekeeper had left and there was only Yao Jin inside this big empty house. Boom! A few more thunderbolts flashed in the sky before the raindrops hidden in the clouds finally poured down and shrouded the entire city in a hazy curtain of rain. Yao Jin immersed herself in her thoughts in that dimly lit room, an almost inaudible sigh sounding out in the room as she turned on the chandelier above her. In a flash, light filled the room. She only took a single bite out of the food on the table, before pushing her plate away. No one cares anyways. No matter how little or how much she eats, someone will come to dispose of the leftovers and then send a completely new meal the next day. No one cares if she likes or doesn't like the food, as they will only deliver according to Yao Wei's orders. As for Yao Wei, that person only knows how to send as many things as possible. After all, there is a higher chance that one will be to her likely. Yao Jin stared silently at the lightning outside her window, a hint of coldness entering her eyes. Sometimes she feels as lonely as that lightning, but at least the lighting disappears quickly in a flash while she still has a long time left. Chapter 16. Jean Siming's ideal weekend is, stay in bed until noon, eat a meal, lie down and play a game on her phone, eat again, and then lie down and continue playing her game. But the tragic reality of these last 2 days dashed away her hopes of a perfect weekend. Every morning she was forced to wake up early by Jean Tong, then forced to eat a large breakfast, then forced to run in the morning before being dragged to play basketball at the gym. If she tried to resist, her allowance was threatened. She lived under Jean Tong's oppressive rule all weekend, and on Monday morning, when they sat in the car together, she still glared at Jean Tong coldly. However, ever since she played basketball with Jean Tong, who knows what muscle is pulled in his brain, but his attitude towards her suddenly flipped 180 degrees. Now, he even started to praise her left and right. I told those boys long ago that my sister is an S-rank alpha, but they just wouldn't believe me. Now that they've actually seen you, the look of shock on those idiots' faces, I'm going to laugh to death at this point. Ha 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 ha. Sis, you're too amazing. You can shoot with 100% accuracy no matter what position you are in. You are a natural genius. Jean Tong, who sat in the back seat, leaned forward to chat endlessly in Jean Siming's ear. Jean Siming turned away impatiently in her passenger seat and distanced herself from him with a look of disgust. She blacklisted the sport in her heart from the moment she stepped onto the basketball court. Those sweaty bodies in jerseys and shorts, the only way she could reduce contact with those sweaty bodies was to desperately shoot as soon as the ball landed in her hands. What 100% shooting accuracy? She had no interest in such things as well. Sis, why don't you play with us in the future? There's a basketball tournament nearby, and I heard if you win you can even win some money. Impossible, don't even think about it. Jean Siming immediately cut off his dreams. But why? Jean Tong pouted with a what a waste of talent look on his face and opened up his mouth to say more. Jean Siming couldn't take it anymore and pressed a hand to his forehead and pushed him away. Then she put on her earphones and blocked his voice entirely. As soon as the car stopped at the gate, she got out of the car as quickly as she could. It was as if oil was smeared to the bottom of her shoes as she threw away Jean Tong, who wanted to stick onto her, and ran off. She may have a special physique now, but she prefers her stinky and arguing brother, compared to the idiot now. She walked quickly into the classroom and saw a croissant and a bottle of drinkable yogurt on her desk. She was just feeling thirsty, so Jean Siming grabbed the bottle and opened it, taking 2 sips without hesitation. At this moment, Su Xiaohang walked in with her school bag slung across her shoulder and sat down beside her with a smile. Morning Mingbao, you're only eating this for breakfast? Can you really fill up your stomach with just that? Jean Siming froze. Didn't you put these things here? Nope, it wasn't me. I just arrived. Jean Siming placed the bottle back on the table after hearing her denial and leaned back. Then whose food is this? I didn't eat someone's breakfast, did I? Su Xiaohang wanted to laugh at the guilty look on her face. What are you saying? Since it was on your desk, it was definitely for you. Mingbao, did you become stupid after differentiating into an alpha? Don't you remember all those snacks that used to be secretly stuffed into your desk? I thought you were used to it already? Speaking of this, Jean Siming lowered her head. In the past, she really did receive many snacks as gifts. But after becoming an alpha, the snacks stopped. This is actually the first time after her differentiation. Su Xiaohang leaned over and picked up the bottle, reading the label on it. TSK, this brand tastes pretty good. I recently developed a liking for it. Ah, it must have been given to you by a shy little Omega. By the way, you shouldn't act so cold to people you don't know in the future. Omegas are all so cute and shy, if you act so fiercely, you'll scare them all away. By then, no one would want to feed you little snacks anymore. Jean Siming glanced at her with a complicated expression and then stood up. Hey, where you going? To the toilet. Jean Siming stood in front of the mirror above the bathroom sink and reached up to touch her long and smooth hair. The face in the mirror is still as beautiful as always, one could even argue that her face is even more beautiful than before, but, why is she an alpha? She doesn't hate Omegas per se, it's just that she never thought she would differentiate into an alpha, so she never felt attracted to Omegas or considered them as potential partners before. Jean Siming dazed off into her own world when suddenly a crowd of people arrived at the door to the bathroom. Are you Jean Siming? Four unfamiliar female alphas walked in, the last one stepped in front of the door and blocked the exit. The leader is taller than Jean Siming by half a head, and when she called out Jean Siming's anime, there was a dark expression on her face. Jean Siming subconsciously took a small step back in the face of four intimidating girls looking at her with menacing faces. Yes, that's me. What do you want? The tall one in the front sneered at her timidness and took a few steps closer. I thought you were some sort of powerful person, turns out you're just a coward. Suddenly being insulted by someone she didn't know and for seemingly no reason, Jean Siming's buttons were pushed once again and she got angry as she straightened and glared back. Who the hell are you? Do I know you, old hag asterisk? T/N. Usually used for middle-aged woman and literally means big sister, but calling a teen/young woman, this is equivalent to calling them a hag. 5 alphas are clustered together in a small space, so despite the suppressant patches on their necks, their pheromones leaked out in this closed space. Furthermore, Jean Siming's body was stimulated by their hostile scents and her own pheromones began to leak out in irritation without her knowing. The tall girl in the front suddenly felt a frightening pressure and couldn't help but take a few steps back as her legs trembled a little. The several girls behind her also felt the pressure and a hint of fear flashed across their faces. The girl closest to the leader whispered, Yan Xing said that she's a higher rank than us. I think we should be more cautious, otherwise, this will not end well. Humph. The leader gritted her teeth and then spat out coldly, Jean Siming, we're here to give you a warning. Stay away from Yao Jin in the future, or else. Don't hang around her anymore, and don't you even dare have any thoughts about her. You're not worthy enough for her, do you understand? You say I'm not worthy? Jean Siming only seemed to grasp the last point and only cared about the not worthy part of the sentence. These people came to threaten her and then even said she was not worthy compared to Yao Jin? Why is she not worthy? How is she worse than Yao Jin? In what way? Jean Siming exploded in anger, her pheromones in the air, becoming even more strong as her fury increased. The leader couldn't stand the pressure anymore and fell backward onto the floor, sweat breaking out on her forehead as her legs turned into jelly, and refused to stand up. However, she still didn't give up and shouted, Why you, don't you try anything in front of us. Do you know our Qingjie? She's coming back soon and if she sees you pestering Yao Jin again, she will definitely beat you up. You're saying, I'm pestering her? Her pheromones roiled in anger and the faces of the alphas in front of her paled into white sheets. The one by the door even stretched out a trembling hand, ready to open the door and escape at a moment's notice. Suddenly, a microscopic electric shock came from the wristband of Jean Siming's left wrist and a needle-like sensation spread across her body. The several alphas on the ground felt the pressure lift and could finally catch their breaths as they stood up and quickly made their escape out the door. Jean Siming held her wrist painfully and leaned against the wall, taking 2 steps back as she panted in pain. On her wrist is a thin and almost transparent silver-white bracelet that wraps closely around her pulse. This is a device specially designed for high-ranked alphas of S rank and above. Since high-ranked alphas have stronger powers than an ordinary person, in order to prevent them from using their difference in power to do evil or accidentally cause chaos that could threaten public security, all alphas of a high rank must wear these bracelets. This device is made of special materials that can detect a person's pheromones. Once it detects that the aggressiveness in the owner's pheromones exceeds a certain standard, it will automatically trigger a penalty attack. And the bracelet's trigger conditions depend on the wearer's age and when they are differentiated. For someone like Jean Siming, who is still young and has only recently differentiated and thus cannot control their pheromones properly, the threshold for the trigger conditions is very low for her. Jean Siming leaned against the wall, panting rapidly as a fine bead of sweat slipped down her forehead. It took her quite a while to recover from the pain. Once the tingling in the body had completely disappeared, she stood up angrily and slapped the smooth marble surface of the sink, even causing the mirror to tremble at her force. She didn't even realize she had leaked out any pheromones at all. She had only noticed that the other parties smelled hostile and instinctively reacted. By the time she realized something was wrong, the penalty conditions were already triggered. Damn it! Jean Siming secretly cursed at the girls who caused her bracelet to trigger. And, after digesting what those girls said, it seems they thought she was another admirer pursuing Yao Jin like them, and that's why they provoked her like that. They say she isn't worthy? Ha, what a joke. She turned on the faucet and splashed some cold water on her face to try and dispel the anger in her heart. But after thinking about it, she felt even angrier than before. Yao Jin's rotten admirers said such things and provoked her to be punished by her bracelet for no reason. She couldn't swallow this offense. This is all Yao Jin's fault. She kicked the bathroom door in one huff and angrily stomped her way to the classroom. Chapter 17. The bell rang for the first period just as Jean Siming walked in, so her plans to find Yao Jin to settle accounts with could only be suppressed for the moment. She walked over to Yao Jin's desk with a sullen expression and slammed her hands onto the desk. After Yao Jin raised her head to look at her, she gave her a fierce and cold glare before leaving without saying a word. Yao Jin blinked, a bewildered look on her face. Jiang Lin, the girl sitting in front of her, had turned around when she heard movements around her and her round little face was flushed with surprise. TCH, doesn't Jean Siming usually try to avoid you whenever she sees you? Yet she took the initiative to approach today. Did you annoy her somehow? Yao Jin curled her lips up into a smirk. It's Monday, and I've only just arrived at school. Even if I wanted to annoy her, I couldn't have done it that fast. Hamanman asterisk, her deskmate, raised her eyebrows at Yao Jin's words. This Jean Siming is quite annoying, she always seems to be glaring at you. Asterisk T/N, the name may look like the English words for he and man. But the name is pronounced like ha-men-men, where he is a surname and man-man means handsome/long. But she can also be kinda cute sometimes. Xia Yin, who was sitting next to Jiang Lin, turned her head and joined the conversation. Hearing her words, Hamanman's eyes widened slightly. Did I hear that right? Yen, you're actually speaking up for her? Jiang Lin twirled a pen in her fingers as she teased lightly. Shouldn't you know her habits by now? She's the type who is easily swayed, like those people who base their worldview on good looks. She bases her worldview on gender. After all, when has she spoken well of Jean Siming before? The sudden clacking of high heels in the hallway outside interrupted their conversation as everyone moved into their seats and sat upright. A few moments later, the little princess walked in with a stack of papers. Apologies everyone, I was getting the last of the test papers and ran a few minutes late. Anyhow, let's take the test for today. Low groans sounded out throughout the entire room. The little princess is the nickname for their English teacher, a woman formerly known as Tianli due to her petite figure, sweet appearance, and the fact that she is the youngest of the entire teaching staff. Many students became her fans and called her Little Princess in private. Unfortunately, the little princess may be sweet, but she is a strict teacher and especially loves giving out tests. There is always a big test every 3 days and a small quiz every 2 days. Every time the class sees her enter the door with a stack of papers in hand, the entire class would start groaning. But the groans and complaints can only last for so long, and in the end, the tests were orderly distributed, and soon the only sounds left in the classroom were that of pencils writing away. It wasn't until the bell rang that everyone breathed out a sigh of relief. After Su Xiaohang copied down one last word from her friend's test, she handed her own paper in. Then she grabbed Jean Siming's arm as she dramatically wiped away a tear. Mingbao. I'm so lucky to have you, otherwise, I would have long been squeezed dry by these exams written by our great princess. In the past, Jean Siming would flick Su Xiaohang's forehead in annoyance, but instead, she was currently staring at Yao Jin's back while paying no mind to her deskmate. As soon as the bell had rung, the little princess had walked over to Yao Jin's desk and offered a cup of water to Yao Jin. The two were currently chatting and laughing like they were friends, who knew what they were talking about. Yao Jin is the little princess's favorite, and everyone knows this open secret. There were reports of others seeing the two sharing snacks in the teacher's lounge. Who knows how Yao Jin established this kind of friendship with the teacher? To think, in the beginning, Jean Siming was jealous of their relationship and competed to the death for the position of class rep for English class. Yet, the little princess still chose Yao Jin in the end. Seeing that Jean Siming was ignoring her, Su Xiaohang stretched out a hand and shook in front of Jean Siming's face. What are you looking at? What has gotten you so captivated? Jean Siming withdrew her gaze, and her expression became coldly indifferent. I'm not looking at anything. Seeing the indifferent look on her face, Su Xiaohang didn't continue the conversation and instead searched for Bean Sprout to argue with. From the first period to the last class in the morning, Jean Siming waited for the right time to engage. She watched every one of Yao Jin's movements, waiting for a time when the people around her was the fewest, before going up. However, whenever there was a break, Yao Jin would get called outside or surrounded by a bunch of people, and she even went to the bathroom with a group of girls. Jean Siming felt like she was going to go crazy. Doesn't this person have even a second where she is alone? Eventually, the last class before noon was over and everyone left for lunch one after another. However, only Yao Jin was left in her seat. Finally, Jean Siming's chance had arrived. She stood up abruptly, but before she could even take more than 2 steps, Louis came through the door and walked straight to Yao Jin. After exchanging a few words, the two went out of the classroom together. Jean Siming stood frozen, her eyes lowered in thought before she quickly walked through the back door of the classroom. The moment she stopped in her tracks, Louis and Yao Jin walked into her. Louis greeted her on sight. Siming, you haven't gone to lunch yet? Do you want to join us? Jean Siming looked at the smiling, but not actually smiling, Yao Jin beside him, and the corners of her mouth twitched stiffly. Ahem, no thank you. Upon her refusal, the two passed her, but Yao Jin deliberately turned her head to look at her and gave her a deep smirk as she passed. Jean Siming's eyes trembled. From this one look, she can read many different meanings. It didn't take long for Su Xiaohang to catch up to her. Seeing her blocking the door with her motionless body, she pushed her back lightly as she urged, "Why are you standing here so still? When I hurried you earlier you said to wait a bit and then you stood up so suddenly. If you don't go to the cafeteria now, you won't be able to get anything." Jean Siming turned to the side and leaned against the doorframe with a dark expression. Do you know who Yao Jin usually eats with? This, she usually eats with her friends. Why are you asking me this? Su Xiaohang gave her a strange look. I just saw her go to lunch with Senior Liu. Oh. Jean Siming frowned. Oh? That's all you're going to say? Oh? Su Xiaohang blinked, not understanding why Jean Siming was raising such a big fuss. Yao Jin's social circle is quite big, so it's no big deal for her to eat lunch with Senior Liu, right? But it is different this time. Jean Siming quickly gave her a recap of Lu Yi's flower delivery on Friday. After Su Xiaohang listened to her words, she became even more indifferent to the matter. Well, isn't this just more sensible evidence? Senior Liu is pursuing Yao Jin, so he took the initiative to ask her out for a meal and the two agreed to eat together. So she'll agree to anyone who just asks her? Jean Siming stood up straight. This? Su Xiaohang scratched the back of her head. You've been competing with her for so long, you can become a Yao Jin expert yourself, so shouldn't you know her best? Bah, who would want to be a Yao Jin expert? Jean Siming snorted angrily. No, this won't do, I need to take a closer look. Let's follow after them. So the two of them followed Yao Jin to the cafeteria. They got their food and found some seats not too far away from Yao Jin. The last serving of braised pork was bought by Senior Liu. I didn't get to eat my precious pork again today. I'm so sad, Mingbao. Su Xiaohang put down her bowl and grabbed Jean Siming's hand to complain endlessly. Seeing the still dark and stern face in front of her, she clicked her tongue. They're just having a meal together, why are you getting so angry all of a sudden? Wait, could it be that you're in love with Yao Jin? Jean Siming, who was already angry before, snapped her head around and her pupils trembled like an earthquake with wrath. Su Xiaohang quickly waved her arms. I know that's not the case, don't get so worked up. I was just joking. Don't tell me, you like Senior Liu instead? This time Su Xiaohang's eyes widened. Although it's not uncommon for a female alpha to be with an undifferentiated man, the power gap is a bit too big. Senior Liu is pretty good, relatively speaking, but there are plenty more fish in the sea. No matter how rare they are, you can still easily snag hot male omegas by the handful. Cheer up, okay? Let's not get hung up over this one guy. Jean Siming listened to her words and returned them with an angry glare. Don't spew such nonsense, I don't like anyone. I just see Senior Liu as a good friend and don't want to see him being harmed by Yao Jin. She lowered her head and stared at the thin bracelet hanging on her wrist. She got nightmares just from remembering the pain of those electric shocks. Jean Siming gritted his teeth and said angrily, Yao Jin's rotten admirers dared to threaten even me. If Senior Liu gets involved with her, he will definitely be targeted and he is only an undifferentiated human and... She remembered the gaze Yao Jin gave her at the door of the classroom. She always felt that Yao Jin was deliberately trying to rile her up. What? Did someone try to threaten you? When did this happen? Why didn't I know anything about this? They didn't hurt you, did they? Su Xiaohang held her arm nervously and looked her up and down. Of course I'm fine. That group of small shrimps and fishes can't hurt me. Unfortunately, she was punished by her own bracelet. How hateful. Su Xiaohang breathed a sigh of relief after hearing she was fine. As long as you're okay, then everything else is okay, but, with your rank, the average student at this school can't do a thing to you. Jean Siming ignored her, biting her lip as her gaze stayed on Yao Jin and Louis not too far away from them. Su Xiaohang looked at her friend and sighed, patting her friend's shoulder with a trace of pity in her eyes. Mingbao, why don't we avoid Yao Jin next time we see her? Seeing you get worked up but unable to vent it out, and then seeing you get beaten by her every time, my heart hurts just watching it. You shouldn't bottle up your anger for so long, it'll be bad if you get an internal injury. Those words only added fuel to the fire, and Jean Siming raised her eyebrows as she glared down at her. When did I get beaten every time? Su Xiaohang pouted and muttered in a low voice, you're only so fierce to me, T/N, the phrase used here is, which directly means someone who acts like a wuss/really politely in public, but is bold/bossy/arrogant with their friends/family/in private. Su Xiaohang, is your skin itching for a beating? When has she ever not glared at Yao Jin just as fiercely? But Yao Jin is simply a fox incarnated and delivers words heavier than 1,000 pounds with a smile. Those few words can cut her half to death. Seeing the stubborn yet pitiful expression on her face, Su Xiaohang reached out and patted her head. All right, let's get back to business. This Senior Liu, you're going to have to take the initiative to attack. What do you mean? Su Xiaohang leaned close to her ears and whispered something that caused Jean Siming's eyes to light up. I never expected you to be so clever. Su Xiaohang straightened up proudly at Jin Siming's praise. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Yao Jin and Lui faced each other. Yao Jin had her head lowered, her long and beautiful hair hooked behind her ears as her slender fingers moved her chopsticks. Her movements were focused and gentle as she picked at her vegetables. Lui, who was sitting across from her, hesitated a few times before he took a deep breath and picked up a piece of braised pork. This cafeteria's braised pork is very popular and there was only one bowl left when the line got to me. Would you like to try one? Yao Jin raised her eyes to look at the oily and fat piece of meat that had been placed on her plate without her permission. Her slender eyebrows furrowed slightly. A beauty must maintain her figure carefully. Such a greasy and fat piece of meat is best left forgotten. Jin Siming suddenly set her tray beside Yao Jin and sat down, picking up the piece of fat meat with her own chopsticks. Chapter 18. Siming? Lui was startled for a moment when someone suddenly sat down at their table. Senior Liu, what a coincidence, you don't mind if I sit here, do you? Jin Siming bared 2 rows of white teeth with a graceful smile. Ah? Of course, I don't mind. Didn't she refuse when he called out to her in the classroom earlier? Why is SH? Lui was quite confused by her actions, but he didn't pry any further and decided to treat it as a sudden whim on her part. Why didn't classmate Jean ask for my opinion? Yao Jin turned her head, those bright eyes no longer glazed over with boredom as a hint of interest entered her eyes, and her red lips raised upwards in a smile. Hearing these words, Jin Siming instinctively opened her mouth to argue. But then remembering her original reason for coming here, her expression changed as she forced out a smile. With how close we are, this kind of question doesn't need to be asked between us, right? Ha ha ha. Yao Jin's gaze became even more interested at the fake show Jin Siming was putting on, and, based on the relationship between us, I should wholeheartedly ask you to eat with us. Ah, few people know that the dish I ate the most is braised pork. Thank you for so kindly helping me eat it. Jin Siming opened her mouth and then froze up. Damn it, did she accidentally make a fool of herself and fall into Yao Jin's trap again? I'm sorry, I didn't know you didn't like this. Lui said in embarrassment as his ears started to redden. Only now did Yao Jin realize that her words may have hurt the Lui sitting in front of her and hurriedly explained, Sorry senior, I didn't mean. Senior Liu, don't mind her. She is always this picky, and quite particular about everything. There are too many foods she won't eat, so don't mind it too much. Jin Siming quickly interrupted her and even took the opportunity to discredit Yao Jin in front of him. Yao Jin stared at her through her charming fox eyes, watching passively as Jin Siming talked nonsense right and even discredited her right in front of her. However, she didn't get annoyed and instead chuckled lightly. Then, without any further words, she lowered her head and continued to eat. No, it was my fault for acting without thinking and forgetting to ask for her opinion. It's all my fault, and Yao Jin is all good. Lui secretly glanced at Yao, who had her head lowered and continued to reproach himself. Jin Siming sighed secretly in her heart at his self-blaming appearance. She can only hope that her friend, Senior Liu, can see the truth soon. Yao Jin had been treating him so coldly and indifferently during their entire lunch date. It is clear that she has no interest in him. By the way, Senior, how are you feeling? The college entrance exams are coming up soon. Since Jin Siming took the initiative to start the conversation and the two of them were already quite familiar with each other, the conversation quickly fired up. As the two chatted happily, Yao Jin, who was sitting at the same table, was left to her own devices. Eating in silence with her head lowered, she cut quite the lonely figure. She quietly ate her meal, the sound of Jin Siming's happy laughter entering her ears from time to time. Her smile slowly disappeared and finally, she raised her head. Jin Siming. Meanwhile, Jin Siming was feeling smug that Su Xiaohang's method was actually effective, but she immediately turned her head when she heard Yao Jin calling her name. Since classmate Jean has such a good relationship with me, you don't mind sharing your stir-fried vegetables with me, do you? After she finished speaking, she raised her slender eyebrows as she gestured toward Jean Siming's tray. Ah? Jean Siming glanced at the stir-fried veggies dish on her tray. This was her favorite dish, and the lunch lady only ever gave her a spoonful. She hasn't even taken a bite of it yet. Why should I? She was quite reluctant. Doesn't classmate Jean know my tastes very well? I like these stir-fried vegetables the most, and isn't it normal to share delicious food with close friends? Yao Jin blinked innocently up at her. Jean Siming looked at the dish on her tray and then at Yao Jin. She hesitated. It seems the vegetable dishes line is still open. Let me go take a look and see if I can grab you another dish. Louis stood up. No need. Jean Siming shouted through gritted teeth, scaring Louis with her loud volume. Close friends should of course share delicious food with each other, ha 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 ha. She forced out a smile that was uglier than her crying face, as her trembling hands placed some vegetables on Yao Jin's plate. Ah, so little, that's not enough. Yao Jin stared up at her with a pout. Jean Siming glared down at her. Yao Jin turned her head. Senior Liu. Hey, you ahem, here you can take them all. Jean Siming gave her another portion of her veggies until there were only a few single leaves left on her plate. Thank you. Yao Jin picked up a vegetable and placed it in her mouth, her eyes narrowing as she smiled. Seeing the basically empty plate in front of her, Jean Siming took a little damage. However, after comforting herself that it was just a few vegetables, she didn't take it to heart. Meanwhile, Louis helplessly scratched his head as he watched the two of them interact. Since Yao Jin no longer needed him to grab some vegetables, he sat down again and continued the topic he and Jean Siming were talking about earlier. As they talked, they heard a pata sound. It was the sound of a chopstick hitting the ground. When Jean Siming heard this sound, she turned her head only to see Yao Jin holding only one chopstick in her hand while the other one had already fallen to the ground. Yao Jin said a quiet "excuse me" as she bent down. Louis immediately stood up when he saw this. I'll go grab you another pair. After he finished speaking and moved to leave, Jean Siming quickly grabbed his arm. No need, senior. I'll go. Yao Jin, who had just picked up her fallen chopstick, watched as Jean Siming ran off to grab her a new pair of chopsticks. The corners of her lips lifted upwards and she started laughing as she thought of something. Her beautiful eyes flashing with mirth were like stars twinkling in the sky, and those rosy red lips were raised in such a beautiful smile that Louis couldn't help but smile back. What's made you so happy? Yao Jin simply looked at him and gently shook her head. Jean Siming quickly came back with a new pair of chopsticks, and placed them harshly on Yao Jin's plate as she said angrily, hold them properly. You're not a kid anymore, how can you drop your chopsticks like that? At the same time, she comforted herself again in her heart. She was only doing this for her friend, Senior Liu, and she could only hope that Senior Liu would wake up and escape Yao Jin's demonic claws already. But what she didn't notice was the complicated gaze Louis directed at her. When the three of them had almost finished, he looked at the two people and said, if we're done eating, how about we return to the classroom? Jean Siming was waiting for those words and coughed dryly as she said with a smile, Senior, you can go first. Yao Jin and I still have some things to say to each other. Oh. Louis glanced between the two of them and then finally reluctantly left. As soon as he left, the smile on Jean Siming's face collapsed and she turned to glare at Yao Jin. You did that on purpose, right? Did what on purpose? Yao Jin took out a small handheld mirror and began applying some lipstick. Jean Siming narrowed her eyes and leaned forward to tower over her. We discussed this matter just last Friday. Yet you've agreed to have lunch with him in the cafeteria today. Don't tell me you two are just friends and have a close relationship, because otherwise why haven't you eaten lunch with him here before? Why only today? You are doing this on purpose simply to make me upset. Yao Jin's movement stopped and a look flashed in her eyes. It was too fast for Jean Siming to catch and Yao Jin smiled playfully. If you say it like that, I'm going to misunderstand and think you're jealous of me. Jean Siming rolled her eyes, but kept her mouth closed. She's already suffered many losses to Yao Jin's vicious tongue today and had already prepared herself for a protracted battle. So she patiently kept her face calm as she continued staring at Yao Jin without saying a single word. If not, then are you jealous of him? Do you really like him that much? Yao Jin closed the lid on her mirror and placed it back into her makeup pouch. Her freshly painted lips gave off an alluring and seductive feeling as she smiled smugly. Seeing that the other party was refusing to talk seriously with her, Jean Siming leaned back with her arms crossed and her long and narrow phoenix eyes filled with a frigid coldness. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you. Do you think your rotten admirers are easy to deal with? They dared to even start trouble with me. Louis is just an ordinary person who won't ever differentiate. If you get too close to him, sooner or later those people will notice him. If you're trying to target me, then fine, I'll come, but there is no need to involve other people. Yao Jin's expression finally turned serious. Who tried to start something with you? How would I know any of your many rotten admirers? Jean Siming frowned in thought and then remembered something. I remember hearing them mention a Qingjia. Yao Jin's long and luscious eyelashes trembled slightly, a dark look flashing in her eyes. You are an S-rank alpha with rough and thick skin. No matter how you look at it, you should be fine. That's a given. Your group of rotten admirers is like a group of small fish and shrimp. Of course, they can't do anything to me. Jean Siming raised an eyebrow. Perhaps it's because she's been talking to Yao Jin for a long time now, so despite her anger increasing, she didn't explode like before. Alright, I understand. Yao Jin spoke one sentence and got up to leave. Jean Siming didn't expect her to answer so firmly and subconsciously reached out to pull on her clothes. Wait, what do you mean by this? You actually agreed? Yao Jin lowered her head and glanced at the hand clutching at the corner of their clothes. Of course. Didn't you just accuse my rotten admirers of doing wrong? I don't have any other choice as I can't control them. So, I can only minimize my contact with Senior Liu, but, you must know that I am not very good at refusing people's requests. I don't want to make things awkward either. So if he takes the initiative to come to me, I can't do anything about it. Jean Siming jumped up and glared at her angrily. Why do you mean you can't refuse other people? Don't you have quite the sharp teeth when it comes to refusing me anything? Why don't you ever think about how it would make things awkward for me? Yao Jin snorted and then smiled. That just means classmate Jean is not a normal person. After all, everyone else seems to be able to get what they want easily. So, maybe you should be proud of yourself? Jean Siming's mouth turned to the side and she looked like she was going to vomit in disgust. Yao Jin simply gave her a smile and then turned to walk away. After everyone had left and only Jean Siming remained sitting at the table, Su Xiaohang, who had been sitting not far away, hurriedly came over. So, how did it go? Jean Siming smiled at her and snapped her fingers. Your method actually works. I've won the battle. Ah? Really? But I was sitting beside you guys just now, and all I saw was you serving Yao Jin food and then getting her chopsticks. I thought you were suffering losses from her again. Su Xiaohang said with a concerned and worried face. The corners of Jean Siming's mouth twitched when she heard these words. Aya, don't sweat the small stuff. Isn't our main task to protect Senior Liu? Now that I have successfully messed up their date, and Yao Jin has promised not to approach them, I can say we have succeeded. And, I've decided. Su Xiaohang looked at the confident person in front of her who seemed to have made up her mind about something big and quickly asked, what did you decide on? What are you going to do? I've decided that since her herd of rotten admirers was the one to provoke me first and she herself said she can't control them, I'm going to help her out and weed out each rotten flower one by myself. Author's notes. How to say this? If you think Yao Jin is a green TB*TCH, then I must clarify that she is only like that with our Siming. Perhaps it is because I've written mostly from Jean Siming's POV and the relationship between the two of them in the early stage is one of rivals, the type where they can't stand the sight of each other. So from Jean Siming's POV, Yao Jin will naturally be painted in a bad light. In terms of Yao Jin's personality, there is a lot of foreshadowing that will come to light in the future. Mainly her family environment has led to some minor flaws in her character, and well, I won't say too much about this now as I will expand on it later. I just wrote this because I wanted to say she is not an evil seductress or anything like that. Don't be influenced by Jean Siming's POV.